let's learn more about the untold story of the United Nations Environment Program. So Maria, let's start with you. Definitely, we know that this has been your life mission and that the study of UNEP is at the core of your work and of what you do. So tell us a little bit about how the book came to be. What is the main message that it has, and what is that untold story of UNEP that you want to present us?
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Dan and Gus, for joining us here today. It's such an honor to share this virtual stage with my mentors and with Natalia. As you said, this is the genealogy, the intellectual genealogy really exhibited of me being a past student, and then I'm seeing so many of our past, present, and hopefully future students at UMass Boston. But yes, Dan was my dissertation advisor. I was his first PhD student, and it is truly an honor that Natalia was my first PhD student and now an alumna. So this continues, and this is a story that never ends. Indeed, it has become my life mission. I started as Dan's research assistant during my master's years in the late 1990s. It continued into a dissertation later, and then into a life's mission that now is a book that is being released as UNEP turns 50 next year. But so I want to share the process, and we'll talk about the substance a little bit later. But especially for today, we actually put together a little film about how this came about with Joe Aguayo, one of our now senior fellows at the center and an emerging leader that both Dan and Gus saw in 2009, because he's been working with us on global environmental governance and helped us film when we convened all of UNEP's executive directors in 2009. And so Joe and I put together a little story about this book and this intellectual journey. So it's just a few minutes. So Shauna, press play.
And the environment was equal to pollution. We didn't care in the developing countries about pollution at that time.
We realized from the beginning that this had to be a program of the entire United Nations.
And those 4 resolutions basically were finally adopted. 95% of them were adopted by the conference in Stockholm. And so UNEP was launched by the General Assembly on December 15, 1972.
Studying UNEP for decades. Once, like many academics, I advocated that governments should upgrade it to a specialized agency, like the World Health Organization. After poring over the archives of the meetings leading up to UNEP's founding and interviewing those involved, however, I changed my mind. UNEP, I found, was not deficient by design. Its mandate was ambitious, its structure was nimble, its financing flexible.
It was established with a governing council that designs policy, governments design policy. And then it was required to coordinate, catalyze, and activate the whole UN system into doing things.
Good discussions, a lot of new ideas and proposals on the table.
I set out to discover how and why UNEP had performed and what could be improved. To answer these questions, I connected with the founders, the leaders, and the staff of UNEP. Their narratives informed the untold story that I share in this book. 2009, we convened a rare gathering, the Global Environmental Governance Forum in Lyon, Switzerland. We gathered 80 environmental leaders in Lyon, including emerging environmental leaders, to reflect on the past and envision the future.
This is UNEP. This is global environmental governance. All of you had a leadership position at one time, or you will at some point in the future. We have tried to gather here the past, the present, and the future.
Yes.
The forum brought together for the first and now only time all 5 consecutive executive directors of UNEP until that date: Maurice Strong, Mustafa Toba, Elizabeth Dowdeswell, Klaus Topfer, and Achim Steiner.
The very first one is, what is it that member states want? Do they want an organization that is a sustainable development organization, or do they want an organization that is an environmental organization with the responsibility for making environmental input into the broader sustainable development question?
That the current economic crisis and the environmental crisis, these actually have their roots in the same thing.
2 things have happened in the past 30 years or so. One is the proliferation of multinational, multilateral environmental treaties.
The green economy has arrived. The question is, will those who, in a sense, have a vested interest in the current economy, in the current energy infrastructure, in the current transport system, because they've invested in it, they've chosen certain technology, will we allow them to hold us back?
Maurice Strong and Mustafa Toba shared their stories about UNEP's first 20 years, when the institution evolved from an idea about a small catalytic body to an institution that had to claim its rightful place at the UN table. And so it did.
And the 4th is to have a special session of the General Assembly.
Ambassador John MacDonald was the secretary of the US delegation to Stockholm and recounted the original vision for a new international environmental organization and the decisions on UNEP's location in Nairobi.
13 nations stepped forward and said, we would like the Secretariat located in our capital city. Now, there were 6 developed countries and 7 developing countries.
We listened also to the stories of Bill Ruckelshaus, the first administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
They were big polluters. They were very visible. They were not supported by the public in what they were doing. So going after them in the courts to enforce the standards was relatively easy.
We listened also to the stories of Jim McNeil, the Secretary General of the 1987 Brundtland Commission. We learned about a complex institutional landscape and about an ambitious vision. We also heard of limited capacity, strained connectivity, missed opportunities, but we witnessed courage and leadership. These statesmen have now passed. Their stories, however, live on. This book is in memory of the women and men who have passed and who, with imagination and courage, created the system of global environmental governance. We carry on your light.
So Maria, it's clear that you have like a direct connection to the real story and the leadership and the community that you built around this book, your research, and the analysis of the United Nations Environment Program. And of course, that takes us all the way back to Dan and Gus. How do you two recall all this story and the process that took back to the governance leaders meetings and the bringing together of the executive directors? How do you put that into the early days of this research process and how this all started?
Gus, you want to go first?
No, you go first. You were there already there when I arrived.
So I traced this back, Natalia, to Maria's arrival at Yale in the 1990s. So the late 1990s, she came first as a master's student. And as she mentioned briefly, she joined me as a research assistant. And, she stayed on and did a PhD with me. And it was that I think got her going on this agenda. And it is a great joy to see Natalia following from Maria. But let me just pause and say that all of us are students of Gus Speth. And every one of us who thinks about not only global environmental governance, but frankly, what it is to have an environmental movement owes great debts to Gus, who really launched this effort. And I might add, did so from the dining hall of the Yale Law School, where he sat and scratched out the first grant proposal that led to the creation of the Natural Resources Defense Council, one of now a number of NGOs that have really carried the torch for, again, at this point, about the same 50-year time frame. And in addition, Gus really put some of the critical issues of the day in front of us all, ones that in some cases we've responded to pretty well, in other cases not so well. But I'm thinking in particular of climate change, where when Gus left NRDC and entered the Carter White House, he became chair of the Council on Environmental Quality. And it was there in 1980, in the waning days of the Carter administration, that the first government report on the threat of climate change was put forward. And frankly, it took years, and I'm sure Gus would argue decades, for that vision to be taken seriously. In fact, maybe Gus will tell us it still hasn't been. But I would argue that I think we've turned a corner as of 2015 and a big corner as of the arrival of a new administration in Washington now almost 2 months ago. But, at that time, Maria had really taken to the issues of trying to understand the environment in its global context, trying to make sense of how the world community came together. We were still at that point thinking through issues like the challenge of the global commons, understanding that there were some issues where you would want to connect to fellow environmental leaders in other countries because you share a common problem, like managing drinking water or handling waste. But there was a separate set of problems, inescapably international in scope, with climate change being the preeminent example, but ozone layer depletion being another one, oceans protection perhaps being a third. And I think Maria really understood, perhaps because she, of course, started her life not in the United States, but in Bulgaria. And by the way, just a small color commentary, one of Maria's greatest strengths was that the limited budgets we had, and Gus was generous, but not so generous, so that we ended up having to really stretch our limited global environmental governance accounts. And Maria did a fabulous job, which I attributed to growing up under conditions of some deprivation. And I made it a practice thereafter to hire only people who had grown up behind what we then called the Iron Curtain, because they had learned to really stretch resources. And of course, that's part of our story in global environmental governance and in environmental decision-making broadly. How do you make limited resources work so that we can have an abundant life, but not over-consume in a way that diminishes opportunities for others? And frankly, that's a spirit that I saw early on in Maria, and am so pleased to see that she has turned her interest into a doctorate, and from a doctorate into a career, and from a career into a life passion that now passes this on to further generations. But with that, let me turn it over to Gus.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you very much, Natalia. Those are overly generous remarks, Dan, but thank you. when I arrived at Yale as a dean, Maria was already there working away with Dan. And it was a strong team, clearly. She had the best possible person for her advisor. And what I found was this person who was, Maria was so full of life, my goodness, energy, goodwill, intelligence. She made an instant impression on me. And I was a convert to her causes right away and tried to do everything I could to be helpful. It wasn't nearly as much as some others, but I hope, Maria, I was helpful, and I am so proud of you for getting to this point, for publishing this great book. I hope it reaches a huge audience, and I think there are not many academics who are willing to get so into the weeds and really find out what's going on. What makes UNEP tick? What is the problems at UNEP? And she did. She has really worked this issue and understands UNEP better than probably anybody on the planet. And so to have this book is a real asset, because we need global environmental protection in the worst kind of way in the years ahead. And I think we have a Baedeker here to help us guide us into that future. So I have to congratulate Maria profoundly for this contribution. And I just happened to notice some friends on the wire here. Melinda Kimball was always very helpful to us in moving these issues along. And Liz Doswell, at least a few moments ago, was on the line. And I think the film was really great because it brought back these personalities to life. I'm glad Liz didn't show up on the list at the end. But we missed these people. They were real heroes for our community. And they were good friends too. And Maria is the only person I know who could have brought all 5 of them together in one place at one time to really consider the future of the organization. So thank you. And thank you for this opportunity to participate. Some of the questions that Natalia and others have put together are good ones. I hope we get to some of them down the road.
Of course, Gus. Maria, I don't know if there's something that you want to add to complement your view of that story.
Yeah, let me correct the story. No, this is indeed, it's right. But what I want to emphasize is that both Dan and Gus gave me the freedom to explore these issues, because it is not easy to do so in an academic context. And having 2 advisors that are lawyers actually pushes one to think not only what is and why, but what should be done about it. And then to put it very succinctly and very compellingly in a 2-page memo. So I thank you both, Dan and Gus, for the schooling over the years, and it's not over, and we are continuing. And I'm really delighted to see here people from the various stages of this work. And Joe Ageyo has joined us, the prominent Kenyan journalist who produced this movie, and he was the first Kenyan journalist to moderate the first presidential debate in Kenya. And so it's really wonderful to have everyone here today. And so we'll open up, put questions in the chat. We have people monitoring. They'll feed the questions to Natalia. But over to you, Natalia.
Natalia, can I just say one more thing?
Of course.
Because I want to trace this project that we celebrate for Maria today back now 20 years to when she and I launched a global environmental governance project. And I tell you this in part because Maria has got enormous energy and a commitment to a cause of really thinking through hard problems. And this produced a book that I happen to have a copy of. I don't know if it'll show up, but this is a book that we did in 2002 called Global Environmental Governance, Options and Opportunities. And by the way, 2002 is several years before Maria got her PhD. So for all those who are aspiring to be academics, don't wait till you finish to really start your publications, start to lay down markers, start to do that analysis of what's going on and what the options and opportunities are. Now, this was an edited volume, so we had essays from a number of people. And I just want to point out that essay number 1, setting the scene for this whole discussion, is The Global Environmental Agenda, Origins and Prospects by James Gustav Speth. So Gus has been helping us from a very long point, and the connections you're drawing today of kind of intellectual transfer of ideas really have many dimensions. And I think we understood already by that moment in the early 2000s how much we owed to Gus. And in fact, in our note to open the volume, our introductory comment, we did say that we were saluting Gus, not only as the dean, but for his vision, for his leadership. And, I do think as we look back, and this is precisely what we said, that Gus contributed visionary leadership, policy guidance, and financial support. So we're acknowledging all the elements of a dean, but particularly the intellectual leadership, which is helpful, particularly when you're going in a new direction. And I think, great credit again to Maria for having helped push this project forward, and to Gus for giving us the space to do it, which everyone gets. And it is a special joy to be in an institution where there is that opportunity for young people, and in the end, not so young people, to continue to push ideas forward. And frankly, as Maria indicated in her opening remarks, to push and pull them, and to think about them, and to rethink about them, and to understand what works and what doesn't over time, advance hypotheses, test them, and then refine them. And you think that's what Maria has been doing in the global environmental governance arena for now 25 years.
Thank you, Dan. And speaking specifically on that vision and that comment that you make about how Gus was shaping the structure of this new process and connected all these ideas around, Gus, in 2004, you envisioned that first class that Maria taught about UNEP, and that was like that first moment in which UNEP was being not only the subject of a course in a school, but also the subject of different forms of external evaluation about its performance, its effectiveness. And it was also the opportunity to bring a group of students all the way to Nairobi, not only to see the policy world and how global environmental governance was taking place there at the institutional level, but also to meet environmental leaders, activists, work with the Green Belt movement of Wangari Maathai. So what is definitely that vision, how that came to be, and what is the idea of bringing UNEP to academia and seeing that as the departing point of this life mission of starting the organization?
Well, I had come to the Environment School, what is now the Yale Environment School, Yale School of the Environment. I'll get it right eventually. From being the head of the UNDP, the UN Development Program. So I had some contacts like Wangari and like our friend Mohammed El Ashtray, who used to work with me in Washington and then became the head of the Global Environment Facility. And that was a very synergistic organization with UNEP on a lot of issues dealing with the treaties and their implementation and other things. And one of the things I was proud to be able to do was to get Maria and Mohammed to come teach a course at the school, and Maria to be part of that. And so I think that was helpful. One of the things that I had learned at the UN was how important it was to have roots in an institution like the UNDP and like UNEP that reach out into the academic community. This was really brought home to me by a man, Mahbub al-Haq, who was the father of the Human Development Report. And Mahbub pioneered that, and in association with it, he, which was a very academic type report about the status of human development around the world and how the countries compared. And Mahbub had acquired, so to speak, this network of deep thinkers like Amartya Sen and Paul Streeton and others all around the world from different places, and they had become part of our intellectual background at UNDP. I wish in retrospect we had used them even more, but at least we had these tentacles out into the academic community. And if you've ever read the book, The Soul of an Octopus, you know that those tentacles are really quite important. They're alive, they're part of the brain of the organization. And so that was a lesson that I brought back to the school, and I think helped me understand what Maria was doing and where she might go with this.
Thank you, Gus. And of course, there's definitely a connection between academia and the policy world. And Maria, you definitely connect these two worlds with a very specific approach to studying the organization from a perspective that I will say is very unique, not only because it's UNEP and it's the first study of this type about this organization, but that approach to understanding not only the history of the organization, but how it is in terms of its leadership, its connectivity, its location. How do you think how that approach came to be on one side, but also how do you think that this approach, you're now the graduate program director for the PhD, so how do you say that can connect or be a guideline to develop a similar research for other organizations or for other policy issues?
So indeed, studying an organization at quite some depth and breadth and figuring out why things happened and when and who led it is something that I started doing as a graduate student, and indeed as Dan's research assistant, even before I started the PhD, because when we gathered people together and tried to figure out what happened in global environmental governance, there was also always a leadership story. There was always someone who took the lead. And I loved how Dan started by saying, when Gus was sitting at the dining room table at the Yale Law School cafeteria, he thought of NRDC. And so everybody in this space had a story like that. And this is what inspired me. And I started looking into the stories of the people around these institutions. And probably this is why this took so long to complete as a book, but it's also a good time because UNEP now celebrates its 50th anniversary. So it turns out to be good timing. But what really inspired me is the connections that we were able to create with people. And that was partially the Global Environmental Governance Project in the Yale Center for Environmental Law and Policy that I have eventually brought here to UMass Boston and created the Center for Governance and Sustainability. But it's also the space that then the leadership of the university allows you to have. And Dan mentioned how Gus was dean and how important the leadership of the dean was. And I want to give a shout out to our dean here, David Cash, who is also one of Dan's colleagues. They were both commissioners for environment in Massachusetts and in Connecticut, respectively. But let me just share one story of this meeting in 2009 in Glion that you saw in the movie that really personifies why I do what I do and what I try to do in this PhD program that I now lead. In one of the last days of that forum, we showed a movie from the 1980s. Gus Speth was giving Gary Matai was giving testimony about the need to protect the environment. And so half of the people in the room, half of the young people especially, said, whoa, Gus Speth has been doing this for 25 years, for 30 years, and we're still having the same problems? How depressing. And the other half of the room said, oh my God, Gus Speth has been doing this for 25 years and is still going on, and look how energized he is. We are doing something right. We will continue to carry that light. We will move on. And so I obviously belong with that second half of the reactions in the room. And that's what has inspired me. And this is what continues to inspire me, that we need to tell these stories so that we light up the fire, we light up the light in people's eyes, and they say, oh yes, I will continue, and I will change things the way they need to be changed, but because now is an opportunity.
Maria, my children looked at that film and said, God, were you ever that young?
As we called that film, it's when Gus Speth had hair.
So this definitely brings lots of memories and stories to share. I have one particular memory to share with all of you before we continue, but we went back into some photo albums and found some nice pictures from your PhD years, so you can all see some memories of that time. Of course, the graduation day and the trip to Nairobi with the students. There's a couple of people already in the chat, Maria, that have shared that they were there, and that was a highlight of not only their undergrad degrees, but in general of their lives. So this is very rewarding and shows the impact of all of this. And connecting to that, of course, it will be great to see the usefulness of all this process. And Gus, Dan, why do you think that is important for these international organizations that academia takes the time to get into them, to find their performance, to analyze their leadership, to figure out how they are doing, if they are being effective or not? What is the usefulness and the importance of this type of analysis for the policy world?
So I think one of the things we've learned is that there's no institution that's got it all right. And that's true of, but it's true of any institution. And therefore, having an academic world that in effect holds up a mirror and says, here's how you look to someone outside. Here's what's working, here's what's not working, here are your strengths, here are your weaknesses. Here are possible paths forward, here are opportunities, here are challenges, is healthy for an organization. And frankly, I think the world is better for it when an institution has that kind of academic team working on a nonstop basis over many years to provide that thinking, provide guidance, and sometimes to provoke. By the way, in that regard, I hope everyone saw, and Ehsan Masudu's event just noted in the chat, that Nature, that scientific journal, published this week an editorial on this very topic of what we should make of 50 years of the UN Environment Program, and calling for, and Maria may now say this is too much, but calling for what we had talked about a long time ago, which was to move to what we called a global environment organization. Nature calls a world environment organization. But the basic thesis being of the editorial that the world needs to put a sharper focus on the environmental challenges, on the pathways to a sustainable future, and that there would be a value of having a global coordinating body to help ensure that we all stay focused on and understand the pieces of that, the issues that are, and frankly, continue to think about what the best institutional arrangements are globally, nationally, in some countries like the United States, at the state level, and in many places at the city scale, to move this agenda forward. And I do think all of that is part of the value of having academics play the role of critics and commentators.
I think Dan is exactly right on that. And I would just add that there has rarely been an intergovernmental institution which did not have to keep looking over its shoulder at what the governments were going to think, and whether if it was an international development agency or international environmental agency, what the places where the agency was serving were going to think. And so you need this really independent appraisal that the academic community can bring to situations.
Thank you. So regarding those policy debates, and of course that contribution that comes from academia to the study of these institutions, we seem to be going back to that discussion of the World Environment Organization, or that idea of how to shape that structure for the United Nations Environment Program. And of course, Asian points out to that editorial that, Maria, you have gone back and forth on those possibilities, and now that the 50th anniversary is coming up, and now that the book is out, and you have had the time to reflect once again into that process, do you see that happening, or where do you stand in that discussion?
So first of all, I think I was most nervous today, not when I spoke with government ministers or the executive director of UNEP a couple of weeks ago about the book, but today, because it felt like it's my second defense of my dissertation, is my advisor and my dean. And they saw me do that in 2006, and today is a repeat, and it's in front of my own alumni and former students and current students. And I disagree with my advisor. And so it's a very interesting feeling. Yes, Dan and I started thinking about and writing and publishing about a global environment organization. We thought that was a much better acronym, a GEO, than a WEO, in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. And as I said in that movie, I actually changed my mind during my dissertation work. And I changed my mind, not that we need a strong international environmental body, because I think we do, but that we got one, that UNEP was supposed to be that when it was created in the 1970s, that it was not deficient by design. And if there is one key message that I have in this new book, The Untold Story, it is the message that UNEP was not created deficient by design. That the governments at the time in the 1970s, with the United States leading, with John McDonnell in the State Department actually leading that charge, they knew what they were doing, and they thought that they are creating an institution that would be effective. And Natalia, you know, because we have started this project on the Environmental Conventions Index, that I now think that we do not need a World Environment Organization to tell people what to do. We have to inspire people in a different way. But ultimately, my argument is that to be effective, an institution on the environment needs to have capacity, it needs to have connectivity, and it needs to have credibility. Capacity, it means it has to have mandate and money. UNEP has the mandate, it needs to get the money. Connectivity, as we now see, it is absolutely critical to be connected. Without connectivity, you can't do much. And UNEP had not been connected for at least 40 years to its constituency. And credibility, which means you have to deliver on what you promise. And when you deliver on what you promise, people will follow. And UNEP has the potential to be that. And I really think we are now at that path-dependent moment at this 50th anniversary, where UNEP can rise up into its original mission. But we do not need to necessarily change its institutional mandate and its structure, because that mandate is right. And I see John Matusek is here from the State Department, and John has a quote that I also use in the book. It says, the mandate is so strong, you can drive a truck through it.
So definitely, and considering also like the policy experience that the three of you have, we're getting some questions about those challenges of the organization and how to move on now that, as Maria, you said, it is in that path dependent moment where things can happen and there's opportunities for new changes there. And one of the questions comes from John directly, connecting a little bit of what is going on here in the United States about the process. And Gus, Maria, Dan, how do you see or how do you get this new administration a step up to commit the country, the United States, to engage and support UNEP in the way they did back in 1973 when the organization was created? Which are the possibilities for that?
Well, I want to hear Dan and Maria on this, but obviously the key person is John Kerry, who proved to be, I think, a very, very able Secretary of State. And if I were the head of UNEP at this particular juncture, and thank goodness I'm not, I would make a beeline to John Kerry and start making overtures to him and his staff, and basically pointing out the ways that that UNEP can be helpful in this new context, and not wait on the U.S. to take the initiative, but to seek him out, seek out his staff, and start dealing very actively with them.
I would just add that I think what you see with the new Biden administration is a commitment to sustainability unlike any administration we've ever had in terms of priorities. And if you read carefully, you can see 4 priorities the Biden administration has really articulated over and over again. 1 is pandemic response. 2 is to address the economic downturn associated with the pandemic. 3 is racial justice. And the 4th is climate change. But with that, a broader commitment to sustainability. And I think in that regard, you are really seeing some foundations laid for success over the next 4 years. John Kerry starts that issue, but the entire team is very strong. And I think one of the really important elements of the Biden game plan is the commitment to an all of government approach to addressing climate change and sustainability. So if you look not only at John Kerry as the international envoy, but Gina McCarthy as a domestic climate change, but really, again, broader sustainability czar, whose charge is to rally all the different parts of the government. And I think what you see now is Pete Buttigieg at the Transportation Department talking already about climate change. Janet Yellen is the Treasury Secretary. She must be the first Treasury Secretary in history to have made sustainability and climate change a big part of her first month on the job. This is not usually a central brief of the Treasury Department, but it is in this administration. So I think there is enormous promise, including with those that are going to carry the diplomatic torch. I think Tony Blinken knows these issues well. I think you've got Jake Sullivan as the National Security Advisor, who's very well aware of this. Brian Deese, of course, is the National Economic Council lead, who had the climate change brief in the Obama administration. So I do think you've got an extraordinary talented team, a signal from the very top that everyone's going to have to move this agenda together. And I agree with Gus. I think there's an opportunity to use this moment, which may not come again, with this sort of alignment of forces and people, to really set us up with a global structure that can carry us at least for a generation, if not 2, on the critical challenges we face.
So this is exactly what I also wanted to say about any institution, and UNEP and now the United States as a country is this path-dependent moment, that there is a fork in the road moment. Do we take the higher path, or do we continue business as usual? And this is what we are seeing currently in the United States, that we are choosing a different way. And as both Dan and Gus said, it is an entire government approach. And I know we have people here in the audience, Melinda Kimball and John Matusak himself. It would be great to hear from you and what you think, Melinda, if you'd be willing to talk about this issue.
Certainly, Maria. I think, we've got off to a good start with the Biden administration. I think the dilemma we face is the very thin majority in Congress and this tendency for the new administration to lose seats in the midterms. I mean, Biden may have 2 years to really get this going. I think we need to hope he has many more than that, but at least he's put the right people in place. One thing though, ultimately, you need people below these principles to execute, and not much has been done below the undersecretary level at state, where a lot of this effort is critically managed.
And just to follow on to, this is John Matusak. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Yep.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I think there are good people and certainly OES who know the issues and that. I do hope that actually, and I will say that having served in both the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, as well as Bush and part of Trump before I finally had to leave for fear I'd have to take positions that were so untenable that I couldn't handle them. The Obama presidency was very strong on climate change. The broader commitment to sustainability was not there in terms of the whole of government approach and really understanding sustainability as social, economic, and integration of social, economic, and environmental. There was a very strong commitment on climate, but it did not broadly translate into the kind of commitment we saw during the Clinton administration in terms of the sustainability councils and that integrated all of government approach that really took place then. And I really hope with this administration, it's not, well, climate is a existential threat. It is, we have to address the environment in a much more integrated fashion, I believe, and one that does take into account the economic and the social. I think that the points that Dan made earlier and Gus about the commitment of the senior level in other departments is truly good. Hopefully that will translate also into our approach at the international level as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda, and thank you, John. And this is, Maria and Gus and Dan, the perfect connection to my next question, because somebody was asking before why we were saying that not only this is the study of global environmental governance is your life mission, but it's also a life mission. And it's very interesting to see that connection, because definitely there's a clear component here of the individuals behind that story. Maria, the book has a cast of characters. We saw the video, the interviews. We have a bunch of questions coming up also about what people remember from the Guion workshop in 2009 and the conversations that were going on there. I will get to those in a second. But how important was to build that community and to be able to talk with those characters, with that community of experts, to count on their policy experience and the work that they have done for the research project, but also for, let's say, strengthening like the policy contribution that the book has and that importance for the organization. And of course, that brings also Dan and Gus as part of those characters and part of that story and their policy experience into the contribution to your research.
And this also relates, I just saw briefly in the chat, someone asked, what are your research methods? And talking to people is really critical, and actually understanding the real stories behind. And it's so rare that we in academia actually seek out the people that create institutions, the individuals in institutions, and give them the understanding, that the spotlight. Everybody has a story, and history is made of stories. And so my mission indeed had been to collect these stories, to triangulate them, to look into the archives, to talk with the people who imagined the institutions, who led the institutions, who worked within the institutions, who observed the institution from the outside, and then create a collective story. Because there is no one story about anything in history, indeed. And as we know, and Dan pointed out, I am from Bulgaria. We do have various stories about our history. And today, by the way, is Bulgaria's National Independence Day. So it makes me think about history even more deeply, and how important it always has been to have a historian writer who, honestly, in Bulgaria, one of our most important national figures was a monk who wrote the history of the Bulgarian people. And that little booklet has been passed on generations after generations after generations. And that is the history of not only our country, but the people through its various permutations of being part of various empires. And so indeed, I guess my own personal history has played into this, that I tried to figure out, what do people say? Not necessarily that is the story of the institution, but when you put it together and when you hear everybody's different stories, and I'm really delighted to see Arthur Dahl here, whom I have interviewed so many times since 2004, multiple times, and he's worked at UNEP in various permutations. And so their stories come together. I mean, Stanley Johnson wrote the book of UNEP at 40, and UNEP hired Stanley to write that book. Yes, hello, Stanley. And yes, I'll put Stanley on the spot here, because Stanley is the father of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK. And Stanley proudly said, Remain, when the referendum was happening. And he's now an ambassador for environment for the UK. But so collecting these stories and putting them together is absolutely critical. Yes, Stanley.
Well, can I just say, what a real pleasure it is to be here. And yes, I mean, here you have the untold story of UNEP. And I want to say that this is a story which, of course, is published by an academic press and has all the rigor. That said, there is also this story, which is the one I wrote about 10 years ago, which is 300 pages, 400 pages, but it's not as academically rigorous, I'm sure of that, and it's got some wonderful photos. Now, wonderful for me to be here tonight. First, I mean, I can see Liz. I can't see Liz at the moment, but I know she's here, Liz Dargill. When I was doing this book, Maria, like you, I had the pleasure of meeting all the then 5 executive directors of UNEP and recording them and taping them and really having a feeling for what they are going to do and what they were doing. But the question I have now, and it really flows from your analysis. Okay, UNEP was this wonderful, powerful. By the way, I was at Stockholm in June '72, and I think Gus was probably there too. It was a wonderful moment that we created this institution. You rightly described it, and indeed, I think you're perfectly right. It had a central body, and of course, because it was very effective, it has now created some of these driving agencies. Obviously, ozone was the first big triumph, but then there was the pollution control, and there were CITES, and there's these multilateral environmental agreements, which of course rapidly had their own multilateral structures and governing structures. Now, that's all very, very fine. But here we have an absolutely crucial moment in world history when we have to bring the climate part together with the biodiversity part and the pollution part. And what do we find? What we find is, A, we possibly don't have any longer in UNEP the kind of sheer driving personality which Tolber was. I mean, in a way, Tolber was the victim of his own success, because if he hadn't been so successful with the ozone convention, maybe the governments wouldn't have been so reluctant to give him the responsibility for the climate issue. And that was possibly one of the problems. But now we have this real dilemma. There's an absolute need for massive leadership to bring these three aspects together: climate, biodiversity, pollution. And yet, of course, they've all gone off in their separate ways. And now we're terribly busy trying at least to link Kunming with Glasgow. But more important, on Kunming, for example, here you have a situation where, and I'd love to have Gus's comments on this, or Dan's, as far as one can see, there is no prospect of the United States joining the CBD. Now, do you see what a huge hole this brings in the opportunity the world has to deal with this vast issue? Everybody's saying now that it probably takes at least 30% contribution from nature-based solutions to deal with climate change. And yet UNEP can't really move on this, because it can't actually get CBD to do what it really has to do, is get the whole world on board. Well, enough said from me. Wonderful to be here. I would like you to comment on this thought, particularly the absence of one key player in the CBD.
Well, I could say a few words. Hi there, Stanley.
By the way, Gus, I remember meeting you when you were in the Council of Environmental Quality in about April 1970, when I came over as the Tories environment chap. You were there then, weren't you, with John McDonnell and someone else?
Well, it was a little later than later 70s was when I was in.
Was it? Okay.
CEQ. But I think, I guess there's a question I have, it's part of the answer. In the law of the sea, the U.S. has not joined either, and but it sort of behaves a lot, particularly when it's in its interest, as if it were part of it. And my ignorance is that I don't really know whether the U.S. has been playing a constructive role within the biodiversity treaty framework, even though I was there at Rio when the U.S. refused to sign, dismal moment. So I think that's a question I would have. Is there a way for the U.S. to participate in a meaningful way on CBD, but recognizing that our Senate is so balled up right now that getting a controversial, what probably is still a controversial treaty through the Senate is highly unlikely.
So it happens that I was just looking up this yesterday, and there are now 196 member nations of the CBD, and the U.S. is one of, is the only real country. Like the Vatican, I don't think has joined, but it's a pretty embarrassing place to be. And if you look back at that moment that Gus is mentioning, when this being signed in Rio and then became very controversial in the U.S., the claims made in opposition really don't hold up. They went to things like the risk that there would be a loss of intellectual property rights in developing biotechnology. And I think the intervening decades have demonstrated that has not been an issue. So it is, I think, a challenge. But our Congress is so divided, it's almost anything that breaks on a party basis through. So I do think the best hope, and maybe we can call on the Biden administration to step this up, is to do as Gus suggests, which is to comply and act as though the treaty were in force. And by the way, there's some element of international law that suggests that nations that adhere to the principles of a treaty, in effect, make it obligatory, at least over time. It becomes customary international law, even if it's not fully adopted by a treaty vote. So I think there is a value in doing just that. And this would be the moment with an administration that's behind that agenda, and frankly, a world community that's really pushing biodiversity up the agenda, to step up and have the United States play a more constructive role, and to really try to build the momentum, Stanley, that you're calling for.
Well, thank you.
So I see Liz Dowdeswell wants to speak. I'm delighted to have Liz spotlighted and engage in this. Liz, please.
Thank you very much, Maria. I was going to keep absolutely quiet and just listen to so many people I so greatly admire. But first of all, congratulations. I'm so looking forward to the final product. We've talked about it much over the last few years, and I'm really anxious to read it for myself. But two comments. One is that just seeing so many of you that I've known over the years, it reminds me that one of the things that we mustn't lose sight of is just that there is a huge family, a huge global family of people who care and are so committed. And that's something, that's a kind of human capital that I don't think we want to lose, because some of you have been engaged for 41 years or 35 years or 25 years. But you know what happens with this file? You just never leave it behind, even if you're not currently physically working on it. And so it's just such a delight to see so many friends. The one comment I did want to make, and I make it from the position that I'm currently in, which is Lieutenant Governor of the province of Ontario. And during this past year, I have to be totally apolitical, so I can't make any prescriptive comments at all in this position. But I've been reaching out to leaders of all kinds over the province. And I want to underscore the point that Dan made, I think, about this moment in time. It's a moment in time unlike any other because of the pandemic. As I've been having these well over 200 conversations with leaders, they're all private. They're not for distribution at all, but it's allowed me to draw some observations. And those are observations about the opportunity for conversation about environment as well, and about UNEP. And they have to do with things that have been totally laid bare by this pandemic. We now understand so much more about our interconnectedness, and whether it's supply chains or whether it's understanding zoonotic diseases, whatever it happens to be, it's something that has never been brought so much home to us, that if we don't take action, that taking action as an individual country is not going to get us where we need to go. It needs to involve everybody. And the other thing that I think has been laid bare are the inequities, and perhaps the rather false distinction between the social sector, the environmental sector, and the social sector is actually really being thought of quite differently, as we understand that our economies are not going to come back to full productivity until we deal with issues that are called women's issues, issues like childcare, issues like education, and issues like environment. So I think it's just a remarkable moment in time that we have not seen before as a global community. And I think I hope that we're not going to have collective amnesia about what we've learned as we rush back to some kind of normalcy. I call it a better normal, not even a new normal, but a better normal, because there are so many lessons that we should have learned. So I hope that environment and all of you will take the opportunity of this moment in time to make that contribution. But thanks, everyone. It's been great to see you.
By the way, thank you, Liz. It's great to see you. And just to add to your point, it's also a moment where the biodiversity issues and the climate issues are coming together. So there's global focus on both this year, and there's linkages being recognized as nature-based solutions increasingly look likely to be part of the answer to climate change. And for those who haven't yet caught up with it, big news from Yale on this today, with a new $100 million gift coming in to set up a center for nature-based climate solutions. So a huge step forward on that agenda at Maria's alma mater.
Thank you all, and it's definitely connected to also the fact that we are celebrating World Wildlife Day today as well. Not only Bulgaria's national independence, but lots of other environment celebrations that connect with all of this. And going back to the questions and a little bit of the discussion of the future of the environment that is certainly there and connects also the paradox that many of us saw on the videos and also remember from the workshops and the process for this book that talks about the paradox between what UNEP is doing, UNEP's existence, the proliferation of multilateral environmental agreements. And I apologize if I'm taking a little bit of the moderator's prerogative there with that question and taking from Joe's as well, because parts of the discussion go into that issue of proliferation and what happens with the agreements and how that goes hand in hand with the fact that not much progress is being done on the protection of the environment. And definitely going back to the previous comments, the pandemic is leaving us with some important lessons there. It seemed that we lost Maria for a second. We will see Anna or Shona if you can try to reconnect her. But definitely, Gus and Dan, there is a question mark there, like how to face that paradox. Is still, how do you see the future of that, and what needs to be done to strengthen that institutional contribution and that contribution of environmental law and MEAs to the protection of the environment?
Dan?
I'll let Gus go first. He's got a long history and a broad view of this.
Well, I wrote a book about it, Red Sky Morning, back in 2004. And it had all these recommendations in it for strengthening the treaty-making process. And I must say, they're still fresh as a daisy. If anybody wants to take up some of these ideas, but it's not hard to figure out how to strengthen the treaty-making process and the decision-making process within the framework of different treaties. And it needs to be done. And there's some models for doing it in different ways. And so I think, you could give more, you could arrange for supermajorities or bare majorities to make some decisions. You could arrange for decisions to be given to an expert group, as has been done, I think, under the Montreal Protocol to some degree. And there are other things you could arrange for, kind of something presumptively goes into effect unless the government steps in and says otherwise for its purpose. There are a lot of things that could be done to make it easier to get to yes within the framework of treaties and to strengthen there. And then, of course, there's a lot to be done with regard to establishing regimes for enforcement and cajoling and blame and shame and other ways of forcing attention. And I think the NGO world has a big role to play here, and the academic world. So anyhow, it's a big issue, but we know a lot that can be done.
So I would just add that I think the problem is not so much the treaty making process. I think it's the process of implementation. And frankly, in countries like the United States, a problem of political structure around how we ratify these. By the way, as we think of the gaps here, and law of this is one, as we have discussed, Convention on Biological Diversity #2, there is in the United States now a recognition that because of the breakdown of partisanship, we're almost never going to see another day when you can get a treaty adopted by the constitutional traditional method of a 2/3 vote of the Senate. But there is the idea of a legislative executive agreement that can go through the Congress by a majority of both House and Senate. And I think the moment has probably come to push some of these things that have been long stalled on that second track. And I do think getting the United States into these organizations is pretty fundamental to their full delivery of value and to their implementation in a way that works. So I think the US back in the Paris Agreement, which President Biden did on his first day in office, is critical to progress on climate change. I would love to see the US put through the CBD in this legislative executive, which is effectively a vote on it as a statute by majority vote, not a supermajority. And I think law at the sea as well. And I do think all of that would give us a firmer foundation for making these treaties fulfill their ambition. And there's always tweaks that can be done. I do think a lot of these treaties came from a different era, an era where we didn't have electronic connections, frankly, where transparency was not so highly valued. So there would be some rules and practices that might be adopted under the structure of what's already in place that could improve without changing the treaty, how things are implemented and frankly, how we address some of the things that have already been put on the table today, ensuring broad engagement across developed and developing worlds, of ensuring that the kinds of voices that might have been left out in the past are included in the conversation, and ensuring that we're thinking about equity and fairness in multiple dimensions. So all of that, I think, can be done in a lot of these cases without new law, without new treaty structures, but simply by how people choose to implement them.
Good point.
That issue of making the voices heard definitely connects to one final question that we have about the relationship between UNEP and civil society. Maria, there are concerns about stakeholder engagement and which are the possibilities for a more or a stronger civil society trajectory in the relationship with UNEP, in the participation in the United Nations Environment Assembly. What can the organization do to ensure that the direction that was established in 2012 at Rio+20 with the connection with civil society definitely increases, the organization increases its stakeholder engagement and really enacts them in its governance structure?
So UNEP's creation in 1972 was really a product also of civil society engagement, and the Stockholm Conference of that year in 1972 was the first UN conference that actually brought civil society into the creation of the holding of the conference. And we see that again and again in these images of, oh, this is the first UN conference where NGOs were so active and so present. And in a sense, UNEP's own mission, as you heard in the movie, and Mustafa Toba saying, we had to be catalytic, we had to be connective. That was in the mandate. However, as I write in the book, connectivity was a problem. And if we think about it, if we're very honest with ourselves, I mean, we were not on email, much less on all these instant chats, much less on Zoom for most of our lives, right? I mean, with our students excluded here, of course. But when you are an international organization and your mission is to connect to your constituencies, but you cannot connect physically because a 3-minute phone call from Nairobi to New York was the equivalent of $60 today. It's challenging. So how do you connect to civil society when you cannot be there? How do you connect to other governments when you cannot be there, when they cannot be there? I mean, today we take these things for granted. But this is what I've done in the book, and I do have a chapter on the location in Nairobi. And many analysts say you don't touch location. It is too difficult politically, and it's too simplistic analytically. But Dan knows that I had struggled with this for quite a bit. And I did dare to say, here are the issues. And I think now we can overcome them. And so I think now UNEP has an opportunity to connect with civil society in a completely new way. See what we're doing right now. And actually, when I wrote even the conclusion, which was way before the epidemic, I wrote that UNEP should experiment with having online assemblies
that it should have half in person or some structure where people can participate online. That was not even science fiction then. Now it's a reality. And I think UNEP could be, if any of the UN agencies could pioneer that, I think UNEP should. And that connects also to a question I saw from Shireen Zorba in the chat of how do we reimagine? And I think this is where we need to reimagine. We bring people together to reimagine, recreate, and when we are collaborative, when we connect, then that is more likely to last than if we do it all by ourselves.
That reminds me of an idea. Maria, I hope that you will keep us informed as we move into this anniversary year and what happens and what role that you're playing and your friends and colleagues are playing in the process. And maybe it would be a good idea to reconvene a group like this. There's so many great people among the 65 or so who have are participating. It would be great to get this group back together and take another round at this at some point down the road.
Absolutely. We'll start working on this. So my dean, David Cash, note to self, something will be coming down the line.
I think it's critical that we do it and not wait for governments to do it. I can say that now being out of government, just because they've been unable to solve it at the assembly, the idea of enhancing stakeholder engagement, because the Chinese have insisted on a government veto for participation by any individual or group in the assembly process, and has pushed back when UNEP has engaged people, even as experts, that they haven't agreed with and have had difficulty with, and they've been supported by a number of other governments. So we've been unable to tackle this issue of enhancing stakeholder engagement through UNEP, and I think unless there's a strong push of just actively engagement through the academic community and stakeholders, that it's not going to happen. Governments aren't going to solve it without push.
Thank you, John. Thank you for those remarks. So definitely we are at a fork, and all these circumstances, the 50th anniversary of the organization, the challenges that it faces, and all these processes that have to do with environmental law and policy at the global and at the international level present important challenges, but also opportunities to continue moving forward and to bring all those elements into a stronger system of global environmental governance that ultimately contributes to the protection of the environment and brings all those realities of a broad framework of sustainability to be and to be part not only of the day-to-day policy world, but also of our role as engaged citizens, and as the participation of academia is definitely critical to that process. So Maria, before saying goodbye and closing for the day, I'll give you the floor to announce the winner of the book giveaway.
So we do have a book giveaway, and my team has sent me a note on the chat of who's been very active in contributing to the discussions, and it is Scott Hagest. And it is someone, Dan, that you know, and Gus. And so Scott, it is wonderful to say congratulations, you receive a signed copy of this book, and of our global environmental governance dialogues way back when I was a master's student and a PhD student. So it's fantastic. This comes directly from my own students, and we see this upward spiral of we're all connected. So congratulations, Scott. And then Natalia, over to you, maybe for last words from Dan and Gus.
Of course. So Dan, Gus, any last remarks?
Only to say congratulations, Scott, someone who I've been working on these issues with over 30 years. So it's a joy to see Scott with that same energy I remember when he was half the age he is now. And I am really thrilled to be part of this conversation. It's a great joy to be able to connect the work that Gus launched along with so many others that are in your movie and your book, Maria, in the 1970s into the 80s. And to know that there is a next generation that you're training and now Natalia is training to keep the momentum going. Sadly, I don't think we're going to get it all done in the next few years. So another generation willing to put their shoulder to the wheel is going to be critical.
Nothing to add to that fine statement. I just want to congratulate you, Maria, for all the work, all the connectivity that you've established, the people you've influenced, and now the impact we all hope your book will have.
So thank you both very much, and congratulations also to Maria. There's a common theme on all the comments that we have gotten, and it's how impactful your book is, how important it is for the organization, for the environment, how proud your former and current students are. And I pass that message in my name of working with you, of being part of this team, and definitely of seeing the connection of the work that we all do with the policy world and with the protection of the environment. So congratulations again, and best of wishes for the book and for what is to come in terms of your impact and your work with the 50th anniversary of the organization.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Gus, and thank you, Dan, for being my teachers and my professors. And yes, I now try to pass on your passion and your vision to my own students as I enter the classroom. Something I was not planning to do at all, but there I am. Dan said once upon a time, go apply for that one job, and here I am in academia, and really taking cue from you of being in academia and actually doing work that is impactful in the real world. So Dan will get the next generations to come in. And Gus, thank you so much for your inspiration.
And Maria, thanks to all of the team at UMass Boston, from Dean David Cash down. It really is great to have had that infrastructure behind today's event, and to know that they're providing support for you and your efforts every day.
Thank you.
Dan, Gus, Maria, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining us, and have a good rest of your afternoons.